All right, Brendan, we're going to go ahead and get started. So if you could just take your seat, we're just all waiting for you. Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to keep ourselves on schedule here. So I think it's great, the progress that the Drone Advisory Committee has made so far this year. And quite frankly, I think it's a testament to this group, not only of the success of the completion of the first 3 task groups we've created, but even just in the progress of the Drone Advisory Committee overall. And I actually think it's a certain milestone, the fact that we are now taking this committee meeting and broadcasting it live over the internet. And what's great is because it lets people who otherwise might be mystified by what's taking place here in committee or want to get a deeper and better understanding of the topics affecting the drone industry, whether it's for their personal use or business. I think it's great that we've been live broadcasting this entire meeting. And already there are discussions and things that are trending online coming out of the discussions we've had already. As I took a quick peek on the internet, I saw a third people were discussing remote ID. And having some debates back and forth spawned by the discussion around this table. I saw next to some people commenting on Drone Safety Week, and that's great because we're getting improved awareness out about that important initiative. And then just beating out both of those topics, people are trolling me about my wardrobe and the fact that I'm the only person wearing a red jacket. So once again, I'm glad we're really able to open up this meeting to the internet to see what they have to say about my clothing sense and sense of style. So with that, we're going to go ahead and dive into some of the industry-led topics. And there are 3 areas in particular that I want to raise with this group, pause after each one and have a brief discussion on, and then we're going to go ahead and assign 3 new task groups to do a deep dive in these over the next 90 days to come back and present to the full committee upon completion. And the first one is the FAA Facility Maps. And these maps show the maximum altitude around airports where the FAA may authorize Part 107 operations without additional safety analysis. And drone operators rely on these maps to understand whether they are likely to get approval to fly drones near airports or not. And basically, drone operators have noticed pain points with these maps, i.e. airspace that indicates 0 altitude restrictions that doesn't reflect actual risk. And at the same time, there's the need for increased airspace access for the drones. And so we want to pursue this topic carefully. Our goal is to be able to identify how industry and FAA can collaborate to improve these maps and safe airspace access. So we're going to go ahead and form a committee to really do a deep dive into that. But before we go ahead and facilitate these task forces, I wanted to open it up to this group here to see if there are things that we need to make sure that the task group is either focused on or thinking about or we need to raise and make sure get addressed within the task groups and committees. Any comments or thoughts on this topic? Yes.
Yeah, maybe a quick one. Relates sort of the UTM topic that we're going to have in a few minutes, but I assume long-term the idea is for all the data to be provided through the UTM data provider interface. So multiple providers can offer data, right? So right now the assumption that the FAA has to be the curator for this entire set of data elements is probably unreasonable. That's a very high burden. We had a conversation earlier on sort of critical infrastructure. That's not your data. That's probably secret service data, airport maps, etc. So I think how this relates to the UTM topic and the data providers, federated data providers underneath UTM, and how do you discover which data layers are important for a specific operation, I think is a related topic.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we'll go ahead and add just the management of this data and access to the data to the task groups.
And who actually owns the data, who needs to provide it. Like different entities will provide different types of data.
Good suggestion. Other things that we want to make sure that this task group looks into? Yes.
Yeah, just a quick question to make sure I understand what we mean by facilities maps. Are we talking about what is otherwise referred to as the Lance grids, or is this something different?
The UAS facility maps are the underlying data structure that supports the Lance application, yes. So some people might call them the Lance grids, but they're officially the UAS facility maps.
Okay, but those are the maps you can go to online and you can actually
Correct.
see the altitude limits for that sector.
Correct. They're available online and they're used by the USSs, the UTM service suppliers.
Okay, thanks.
And just to go back to Gur's comment briefly, with these maps, these are not intended to be the sole data for UTM. I think your question may be a little broader than NOTAMs, a whole wide range of things that in a mature unmanned traffic management system, you would have access, multiple providers would have access to all of that in a machine-readable format. They are two different things.
Thank you, and I'm happy to park this for the UTM conversation as a topic.
Okay.
I think it's relevant. I would say that there's two elements or two sort of roles and responsibility in this. There's like who actually is allowed to offer which data layers. Critical infrastructure is owned by a certain government entity, and airport maps owned by a federated set of entities, et cetera, et cetera. But who's allowed to actually declare changes to the airspace on a local manner? So the 30 minutes, 3 mile local law enforcement, for example, kind of scenarios. There has to be, and again, it's more of a UTM conversation.
Okay, let's put this in the UTM. And again, though, I don't want this to really focus into a question and answer session. The idea here is, what do we need to task these committees with thinking about researching and bringing forward back to this group?
And I think maybe one point is to delineate between what this topic is and which topics really belong in a more general UTM conversation. Thank you.
Fair enough. Other questions or things that we think a committee would need to be thinking about when discussing these maps? Yes.
Yeah, just to make sure I'm clear, this is just looking at the facility maps, so the altitude, how the grid's laid out. We're not talking about other information that might be included or expanding the coverage of that, or that, just narrowly looking at the facility maps.
Right. I mean, this
Okay.
does appear to be a topic that needs to be addressed, and I want to make sure that the committee groups have kind of a streamlined focus to not have it be something that can be kind of all-encompassing
Yeah.
or open. Here is a set of issues that that has been identified, so this is what we want to kind of give the task group to come back to with the specific set of recommendations around.
Okay.
Any other last comments on facility maps? Okay. The next task group that we're talking about setting up is one focusing on beyond visual line of sight. As you know, the FAA initiated a research focus on solving the BVLOS challenges more than a year before Part 107 was in place. Under the Pathfinder program, BNSF and Precision Hawk conducted research for 3 years and were two of the first organizations to receive BVLOS waivers in 2016. And right now, the BVLOS research effort is continuing under the UAS Integration Pilot Program, and we have over 50 BVLOS waivers that have been approved. However, I think as everybody recognizes, one, we're still several years out from having a truly definable and understandable set of BVLOS rules and regulations, and we want to facilitate and focus our efforts to position the FAA to create policy and regulations for this next level of flying beyond visual line of sight. So to do that, we want to put together a task group that can identify what challenges remain that we need to address, and also to make some recommendations to this group to bring forward to the FAA on some possible next steps to move the entire beyond visual line of sight discussion forward. Now, I know this is a hefty topic. It involves not only policy, but a lot of technology. But let me open it up to the committee here to ask, what are the things that we believe that this task group needs to specifically focus on with regards to flying beyond visual line of sight to help us achieve that next step forward?
Do you think they should include one-to-many operations and are breaking the one-to-one ratio?
Well, I think that's something that has to be addressed. I mean, we can kind of put that down as for something the task groups to look at.
Sorry. Okay. Fine, I'll go. I think that's a super important topic. I think it's maybe a parallel topic, and if we agree that it's important, then we should prioritize and task group to work on it. I will support such an activity. As two observations, I think there's work that we spoke early on around BVLOS One is to define the technical standards for vehicle-to-vehicle collaborative deconfliction. I think we all see the sort of end of the tunnel in remote ID, and that's a foundational capability that can be built on with the algorithms that NASA has already demonstrated to do automated deconfliction. I think that's a fantastically important capability that is very inexpensive to implement. It doesn't require any extrinsic sensors, doesn't require any AI or machine learning or computer vision. It's very, very cheap to implement and has high yield. What I think is important, though, is to have a much better clarity on how well clear relates to vehicle-to-vehicle deconfliction, because it really depends on the different entities. A helicopter interacting with a drone as opposed to a balloon interacting with a drone as opposed to a drone interacting with a drone may require a very different sort of deconfliction policy and a set of standardized maneuvers. That's probably an easy topic because there has been so much research and flight demonstrations from NASA that already took place. I think there's the one beyond it, which is really important for true beyond line of sight, which is the non-collaborative commercial pilot equivalent performance specification, which I think some of us have been talking about for about 5 years. That's a hefty topic that we as an industry and with regulators have to pick up and address. It feels like something we keep pushing out for next year. But I think we have enough of us are now flying sensors that can do most of this, but we don't really know what the standard is. So far, I counted about 2 months ago, and there are 4 different definitions of well clear. And they're all performance-based. So which one and there are no definitions unless you look at TCAS, which is an advisory of what actually to do with this information, right? You have to perform a coordinated maneuver. That has to be a deterministic maneuver. And we know that technology is incredibly important for safety. So again, I think there's a low-hanging fruit in the shape of collaborative vehicle-to-vehicle building on top of remote ID. And there's a seminal topic, very heavy, but very important around commercial pilot equivalent performance and how it relates to well clear for sensor-based detection.
Okay, we'll make sure that those are items on the. We'll make sure that those are items on the group's agenda.
Brendan
Brendan
from DJI. I think there's a real opportunity here to try to do something about operations that are only hyper-technically beyond visual line of sight, but are not actually posing an added risk. And to give you some examples of that, you're on top of the bridge and you need the drone to inspect the underside. So you're standing on the bridge, it's technically BVLOS, but it's right underneath it. There's no other air traffic even possible to be there. And so that is not, I don't think, the risk that the BVLOS restriction is intended to address. Or maybe you're fighting a fire and you want to fly the drone to the other side of the building underneath the roof line, technically BVLOS, and yet not really adding, I think, any substantial risk. So I don't know, that's the question for us perhaps to explore is, are there ways of flying technically BVLOS as that is defined in Part 107 and yet conducting an operation that's as safe as otherwise and then opens up life-saving and other opportunities for the use of the technology?
So this is a great conversation, and it's exactly why, as the DFO, we're looking for advice from the Drone Advisory Committee, because just the breadth of topics that were brought up from the slide alone, from Gur, from you, I think from the FAA's perspective, both from the regulatory and the airspace management operations side, these are all questions that we need advice on. One, what do you think are the next gates? What are the things we should all be working on together? We all have limited resources, right? What are the priorities in terms of solving BVLOS? We often say, we talk about completing integration of UAS into NAS. Well, we continue to evolve manned aviation, commercial transport, commercial cargo, and other operations every day, and we use advisory boards to help shape how those things grow. And so this is an opportunity for you to provide us with some input on where you see the priorities are for the next challenges we all cooperatively take on in BVLOS. And I think, you make a good point that it's everything from not just detect and avoid, but how does that work with well clear is it a priority to start looking at the intersection of some of these safety cases between safety mitigation trade-offs between well clear and detect and avoid, and how that works with airspace integration. So that's the sort of advice we're looking for as the DFO out of this. And, because, that's how the mechanism of the advisory committee is the DFO asks for industry advice. So that's what we're looking for here.
Hey, Jay, just kind of building upon your thought, I was just thinking just in terms of opportunities. And I think one of the groups brought it up earlier when they were talking about, looking at this thing in different segments. So a lot of times when you think of beyond visual line of sight, you're talking about what capabilities do the aircraft need in order to effectively, mitigate risk and fly beyond and do the things that, say, a pilot could do, and to detect and avoid, et cetera, et cetera. The other one, though, I think perhaps we can consider, Mr. Chairman, is just the operational control piece. Because, Brendan, when you talked about, something on this other side of a bridge, maybe we need to bring in this operational control component to the beyond visual line of sight conversation, because that forces you to look at it from a different angle, and perhaps that's something the FAA, can consider, as they're thinking about that subject as well. So I just listening to both of you, I just wanted to throw that thought out there as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. Lauren Cass, American Airlines. And I absolutely want to add to that. I think that as we start talking about more commercialized operations, once we get to this beyond visual, the line of sight task, we really do need to start considering operational control, because there's going to be a larger entity running I'll just say a fleet of drones, much like an airline runs a fleet of airplanes today. And I think there's a body of really smart folks out there that have been providing this certainly for years. Joe gets in his airplane, and he's got a dispatcher on the ground working in a big ops control facility. And there's a dispatcher that's providing advice on where to go and how to go. And then the crew goes out and flies the airplane. We're going to have much of that same sort of environment, I think, when we expand drone operations, when they become really commercialized. So I think there's an opportunity, perhaps through this group or others, to make sure that we do consider the tenets of operational control for the future.
Other items that people want to make sure that this task group focuses on or raises in their report?
So, yeah, Wade Troxel, Mayor City of Fort Collins. I think the broader issue of just deconfliction at low altitudes, I think we're looking at it beyond visual line of sight, but there's also issues that will create obstruction and barriers and other things. So, just not thinking about the operator and beyond visual line of sight, to understand the context in which there are that will be conflicts that need to be addressed, and so more of a contextual understanding of the world that you're operating in.
Good suggestion.
That's something that Bob Brock, state of Kansas, Wade and I share some border, and one of the things I'd like us to think about in this task group is to consider contextual models where it might be permissible to do things instead of a one-size-fits-all regulatory schema, but taking a look at an air and ground risk model that says there's nobody nearby in the air or the ground. Maybe there's a different interim solution that might be appropriate on the Colorado-Kansas line that might not fit San Diego or some of the other urban environments. And maybe we're a little bit encumbered by trying to do the one-size-fits-all, so much so that we miss the 35,000-acre rural farm that really can be done without nearly the safety case. So I think some of the things we ought to consider is identify some contextual models and scenarios that we could actually say, this is okay, go ahead, and you accept the risk at an appropriate level, to include air and ground risk case.
Yeah,
Good
this
point,
is
Christopher.
Chris Penrose, AT&T. I would just kind of echo onto this. I think defining the use cases, around when to happen, and then what you need in each one of those use cases to become comfortable with what the action that's going to be taken. I think that can actually really help, shape a lot of this, because I agree. One fits all, I don't think works, in this space, but there's going to be some things where like, okay, we have to do these things under this particular use case in this scenario. If these boxes are checked, then we all feel comfortable. Some of these other ones, we got to go to a much deeper level. And I think using the use cases of what's going to happen in the situation which it's in can give you a good foundation for how we structure that.
Maybe just a comment on this. Full support. I would say that the target level of safety formulation, or sort of formulas that the FAA is using all over the place. I know a lot of us are using the same models. That's probably a preferred way that isn't mission specific. If you become very mission specific, then FAA now has to pick up the work to map from mission to mission. But if the TLS is equivalent and everybody is using the same model, then it's much easier to sort of get permission to fly. And I think that's a model that the FAA is already using in many other places. Thank you.
Just to expand on Gur's comment, technology standards, I see this from my point of my corner of the world, we see this as the biggest impediment to massive investments by at least the aerospace industry. We know a lot of good work is being done at the standards development organizations. At some point, particularly RTCA, a lot of work is going to be coming out soon, in the coming months, not years. And the more clarity from a policy point of view from the FAA, how the interaction of these standards with technology will enable BVLOS. I think today the challenge is get one airplane flying BVLOS, not many. I would focus on that. So again, the key issue is standards if you want to open up the investments. And related to standards on what, I appreciate, Gurs, your comment. I agree with you, V2V is great. And detect and avoid, I will throw in command and control links and the related spectrum issues. No drone is going far away without spectrum, dedicated spectrum, and reliable data links. And that means the FCC has to somehow be part of that work as a country, but it's absolutely essential.
So I agree, maybe 98%. Let me just touch on 2%. Command and control is incredibly important, but where you implement command versus control is unique and distinct to each platform. Some platforms may choose to implement command and control in a way where the safety critical capabilities are on the ground. At that point, your command link is safety critical, and of course, then the spectrum, etc., aviation protection, protected in some way becomes really important. There are other applications. We're on the record saying that all our safety critical control features are on the aircraft. So command is important for us, but it's not safety critical. So let's say command and pause and control as opposed to command control is bundled, and leave the flexibility for different equipment manufacturers to place the technology where they see fit. Thank you.
Okay. So I think these are some great items. We'll make sure all these get listed for the task group to dive into and report back to this group on. The third item that we would like to create a task group on is unmanned traffic management. NASA pioneered the UTM research years ago, and many industry stakeholders participated in NASA's efforts, also including my company, Precision Hawk. Today, we know that UTM will be required for widespread BVLOS operations in complex airspace. There's a whole bunch of industry players, as I know everybody around this table is aware, that have tested different components of UTM, including remote ID, an early building block. The FAA released a UTM concept of operations in 2018, which laid out a framework and vision for UTM deployment. And we must now work together to identify priorities for UTM development and deployment, and to make sure there's a plan for safely rolling out UTM. So the third task group we're looking at creating would focus on UTM. What are the other items that this group make sure they need to discuss or address to bring forward to the committee? I just nailed it all on my 2 slides. Perfect. I'm happy to take. Oh,
no, I'll jump. I'm the designated jump in.
Go
Sorry. I think the topic of discovery and who is actually in the federated registry is incredibly important. There's some certification basis which relates to operational control. I think that's a very important point. Just because the standards specify that it's possible to have a federal architecture doesn't mean that everybody actually can be a certified operator in that. And how do you remain in compliance as an operator, I think is very important on the control side. I don't think it's not a permanent blanket permission to operate, right? I mean, if you degrade the safety of the airspace because your system integrity is reduced, then somehow we have to eject you. That I think is a very important point. I think there's probably some NASA tasking, especially on the ATM research group on simulation. They have massive amount of data that we can learn from. They know how to run large-scale simulations
that's a good point.
Over the last 20 years, and I think they're ready to do that work, but they're waiting for tasking from the FAA. Thank you.
Okay. We'll make sure that gets included.
Just kind of along the lines of sustainability. So as I think of from an operator's perspective, ultimately what you want in a UTM is something that's going to be sustainable, very similar to, the ATM today, when we operate the thousands of flights around the world. So from my perspective, I think it would be interesting for the group to kind of look at, what are those things that are going to be needed to make this sustainable, which could mean, financially, how are you going to pay for it? And how do you make it, from a user's fees perspective, something that everyone's going to participate in and share in making sure this is a sustainable feature.
So if I remember that the previous version of the DAC has done a little bit of that work. I don't know if it's like we can maybe start by taking a look at that and see what delta is missing. But if I remember correctly, the old report from about a year and a half ago, it turns out that the cost was so much lower given the different architecture that it wasn't really a big deal, but obviously sort of something for the FAA to consider. Thank you.
Look, I think that these, and for all these different task groups that we're talking about, what should be on the plate, I want to bring it in a little bit because I think that we certainly could talk about everything from long-term business models to all the different conflicting scenarios. But for it to be actionable and for us to take this next step forward, we think we need to kind of actually bring this in a little bit and say, okay, well, we're looking at where we are today. For us to take just that next step forward, what can this group do in conjunction with the FAA in making that next set of policies that lets us just get further than we are today? So the thing that I want to make sure is as we're putting together these task groups, it's not to talk about the blue sky opportunities of how a centralized global UTM management system, just to use one example, might run. It's to say, okay, well, noting where we are today and knowing that this is the direction we need to head in, what's that next step that we're going to take? So I think that many of the issues that are being raised are certainly good ones, but maybe the task groups might take some of the questions, say, hey, we're going to put a pin in these, knowing that these industries are just going to develop, but what we're ready to do, this next step that we're going to take, should follow this set of recommendations. So I just want to level set the expectations for this group for what the task committees are going to come back with. Other items for UTM that we want to make sure that these groups are addressing? Okay, terrific. So we've kind of been having an ongoing discussion there. So that then leads right into the new business specifically, which is that we want to go ahead and create these 3 groups. So we are going to...
Go
ahead.
Just of order. Actually, the DFO needs to do the tasking.
I was about to say.
Sorry.
What I'd like to do now is hand it over to the DFO to do the tasking, obviously. No one here didn't know that. So let me go ahead and hand that right over to you, sir.
So thank you for the discussion. Good discussion on the facility maps. Yes, we would like the DAC to take on. What are the best options or options for better FAA industry collaboration to update and improve the UAS facility maps and airspace access for the operators? So this is very much around the facility maps. So back to the chairman.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and am I supposed to just recommend? Am I just supposed to recommend who's
You asked for a motion. Yeah, my mic is on.
Oh. I knew that. So we'd like to go ahead and have a motion that Marilyn Mora take on the task group for the facility maps. Do I have a motion for that? Okay. And second? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No? Fantastic. That task group has now been created.
Okay, now that we're learning this.
Point of
second time on the job.
Point of information.
Yeah, the second one will go much easier, Michael.
Point of information.
Yeah.
I just want to know, how do task force get formed? I know they
We're
were.
watching it right now.
Well, that's my point. Can I offer one?
Oh,
So technically, they need to come from the DFO. And so I think in the future, if you would like one, it would be appropriate through either the public forum like this to offer up for a future meeting, or to contact through the DAC to request one, or there are other fora that you could use. But today, there are the 3 taskings we're looking at right now to focus on for the next 90 days.
Hey, wait, why don't we chat afterwards? You have an idea for a
well,
follow-up?
and I think this needs to be more of an open process, and I think there are some issues that are being avoided. And I think trying to shut down some discussion on the last task, I think also, to actually try to be very specific and that sort of thing. I think there's some real issues that aren't being addressed that need to get out in the open and need to be addressed by this body or somebody. And so it's either going to be done here or in public. And if you get on the backside of the public in bad situations, you're not going to have a lot of support. So I think it's better to be more upfront and address things here at the DAC. And so I would gladly let's talk about how to get into the process and get some more broader issues out on the table.
Hey, wait, I think that you're certainly raising some good points, and I apologize if it wasn't clear for the entire organization how we go about creating any of these task groups. So these ideas have actually come up from discussions that both the FAA and I have had with members around the table. So if you have ideas for future task groups, let's follow up after this meeting. We see about putting that on the next agenda. I also want to be clear, to me, to shut down any discussion around the last topic. I'm really simply actually trying to set expectations for what we expect these task groups to deliver in the future. So that being said, it sounds like you have some good ideas. Why don't we connect afterwards, and we'd love to hear them. We can talk about getting them on the next agenda. Great. Thank you, Wade.
Yep. So the second proposed tasking is on the beyond visual line of sight challenges. And again, one of the things that we're very interested from the FAA side in hearing about are what are the gates or the priorities for the next set of BVLOS operations that we think need to get approved, barriers we need to remove, policies, procedures we need to address in beyond visual line of sight. I heard a very good sampling of things, and I also heard some things that could be brought together. Maybe I like the idea of some of these framework ideas. How do you relate the various standards? So that's what we will propose to the DAC, is the second tasking around BVLOS challenges, and what are the remaining challenges and what are the priorities.
And so we're going to go ahead and make a motion that Todd Gretz go ahead and take on the running of that second task group on BVLOS. Do I have a second? Okay. Everyone okay with that? Aye? Any opposed?
Aye.
Great. Todd, congratulations.
Who made that motion?
Okay, I'm going to say me.
Okay.
Okay. Am I allowed to make that motion?
I don't know if that's a
My
point of
parliamentary
order or not, whether the chair can make a motion.
Oh, I
That's
apologize.
fine.
My parliamentary skills are like iffy at best here. I'm sorry. Maybe I need someone else to go ahead and make that motion. Oh, thank you.
Second.
So, for Kimchi motion,
Second.
second by Brock.
Great. All in favor? I promise this group I'm going to read up on my Robert's Rules of Order books, so the next meeting will be much smoother. Go ahead.
Okay,
Back over to you.
Now, if we could move the slide to tasking number 3, please. Oops, no, that's a little too far. We haven't gotten to closing remarks yet. The proposed act tasking number 3 is on the unmanned traffic management. Industry comment on the unmanned traffic management concept of operations. Unfortunately, we thought 2.0 would be available for this meeting. We will correct this for the public record. It will be 1.0, which is the concept that is available to everyone right now. And then provide industry prioritization of the UTM capabilities as well. And again, back to the scoping comment, Michael, on this one, it's very important to all of us in a performance-based rulemaking infrastructure framework, we all have to work on the industry-based standards together. So part of the underlying thought and in this tasking is also, where should we all be focusing our efforts on these standards? We know we have some standards coming out of ASTM on UTM, but we know those aren't all the standards we'll need. So where do we want to focus next? And that's one of the things we're hoping to get out of this, is really a cooperative understanding of the next priorities.
So great. So with that, we had David Silver volunteer to head. Oh,
Motion. That's for a motion to adopt it.
Any motion, Doug?
Yeah.
I'd like a motion to adopt the proposed task groups. Okay, David, a second?
Usually you could take a question first.
Oh,
if you don't mind.
questions?
Sorry. Just when is 2.0 anticipated to come out, just in context of going back to 1.0?
It's under review, internal review right now. I expect by the end of the calendar year, it should be out.
Just note your comment about revising this and obviously maybe using the most current version if it's.
Yeah,
within a
if it's
matter of
available
months.
during the time frame that you're doing the work, we would make it available, but in terms of the formal tasking, since I don't have it now, I can't hold you to it. Yeah, move to
A
accept.
move to accept? Great. Second? Great. All in favor? Aye, perfect. Opposed? All right.
Okay, excellent. We're done. Michael.
Terrific. I think we can all agree I was holding a flawless meeting right up until the end. It was smooth. Yes.
Usually in the last DAC, we had any other business, which is an open conversation.
I was just commenting on we're not done yet. We got
I-
closing remarks.
It just didn't show up in the ebook. Usually we have a specific place for.
it's still part of the review
the tasking. Thank you.
Review the tasking, new business. Yeah.
You say the next order of business is to review the tasking? Is that what you said? Because I have a question about whether we approved 2 tasks or 3, who are the chairs and how do other members of the DAC participate?
So I was just about to get to that. So we have designated the 3 task leaders, Maura, Garrett, and Silver, who are the 3 task leaders. People who are interested in joining any of the task groups, I was going to recommend email myself. Please CC Diana, and we'll get as many people as are interested in participating. We may reach out to some of you individually that we know have specific expertise in their areas to join the groups. So an email will be distributed right after this meeting, listing the heads of the 3 groups and asking for people to volunteer to contribute to them. And again, we really welcome everyone's participation. Are there other items that people would like to raise for new business discussion? Oh, yes, Wade.
Yes, I would like to propose a task force on deconflicting aviation in low airspace.
So we would like to talk with you afterwards and get your ideas on exactly what that would look like, and then we'll get back to the DAC the next time on any potential new tasking.
If I may ask a question about that? When maybe unpack deconfliction, there is a deconfliction task within both UTM and vehicle-to-vehicle communication relying, is that the algorithm to deconfliction? So if I map this to like TCAS language and...
Yeah, very good. I do believe it does, and that's why I think I felt it was cut off on the 3rd item to discuss it more in terms of state and local input with regards to the UTM. So I think it does impact some of the other task force. But I think we need to have some discussion as it relates to the issues as it relates to urban contexts and the kinds of conflicts we're just not talking about, avoiding things or avoiding another aircraft or perhaps a rogue piece of equipment, but also the everyday kinds of things that these emerging systems will see, and how are they dealt with in a meaningful way. And I would just talk about, the approval of the 135. Basically, some of the quotes is basically we've authorized unlimited aircraft within our municipalities and other sorts of things without even addressing some of the issues that will be faced. And I, for one, would rather have some discussions now rather than, bad things happening and then having to probably meet in this exact same room for bad issues. And so let's deal with it up front, and that's what I'm talking about with regards to deconflicting aviation and low airspace.
It sounds like that's something that really should have its own potential task group. So, I mean, I know that deconfliction is, yeah.
So I apologize. It's not when we say deconfliction, at least in the technical context, we usually mean something slightly different. If you talk about sort of local rights versus federal level rights, I think that's an incredibly important topic. We picked it up in the first DAC. We were unable to come to a coherent conclusion. I think it deserves another attempt.
Yeah.
I agree.
So let's touch base after this meeting. We can set that up for potential discussion next time.
Michael,
Brendan?
Brendan Schulman, DJI, just to speak on that. So I did, the DAC did spend the DAC Task Group 1 did spend 15 full days in person over the period of 2 years on the topic of roles and responsibilities of different government interests, and did deliver recommendations or a report of some kind. It wasn't a fully written report, but there was work product delivered to the FAA on those issues. And having been the co-chair of that task group, I can't imagine that we didn't fully, I don't know any other committee or forum where that issue has been more thoroughly looked at and considered than at the DAC in its prior iteration. And I wouldn't want us to try to revisit or redo the work that's already been done and I think delivered to the FAA.
Well, I don't want to shut down any potential discussion. And again, so maybe it's inclusive of the work that we've done in the past, or again, maybe it's also, a year plus later and things have changed. So let us look into what the potential topics are. We'll certainly pull up the past research and see if it makes sense for this committee to either update or address it again.
Great.
Thank you, Brendan. Matthew?
Yeah, just to kind of enter into the conversation, which is obviously something that's going to affect all aviation, not just the drones. Senator, you're aware of Senator Lee's legislation that he introduced yesterday? And basically, when you cut through it, what it says is the property owner or the local municipality government should own the airspace from the ground to 200 feet. The FAA should not have control over that airspace. From 200 feet to 400 feet should be for the exclusive use of unmanned vehicles, segregation of airspace. The FAA should basically revisit the issue of what clearly defines navigable airspace. That's only Senator, Mike Lee. I don't know about anybody else, but we're dealing with a bunch of initiatives at the local levels and the federal level for helicopters, which has the same theme to it. The FAA maybe should not control the low-level altitude airspace, and it should be property owners and government agencies in the municipality level. And, obviously, the helicopter industry's got pretty strong opinions on that, to say the least. And but it's something that you're going to have to deal with because it's going to be put in your face by the legislators all over this country. And as I said, it takes up a lot of our resources and time right now. An interesting question is, where's the FAA at on this? What's your initial reaction to that kind of stuff? The last time I asked this question, the then administrator says, you never know what the future might hold. That's not the answer I want to hear from the FAA administrator. And the legal team that was present said, yes, we think it's a valid subject. We want to revisit navigable airspace, and we want to revisit who controls what. And I believe that everybody has a place at the table. That's true. When you're talking about airspace impacts, towns, villages, municipalities, states belong at the table. They have a stake in this. We belong at the table as the industry. But none of the other people at the table should be writing regulations and providing surveillance and oversight. We're stakeholders. We're not regulators. We're not subject matter experts in writing the regulations and controlling the airspace. The only person at that table that should be doing that's the FAA. And that's where you start getting into this stuff. And I'm going to give you the example I gave you the last time. Our world, we spend a lot of time 500 feet or below. I mean, I can't even count how many hours I've got flying below 500 feet. And the mission that we have, one of them, the most graphic example is we do power line pipeline patrols and repairs. In a given day, my members might run 100 miles of power line at 500 feet or less. I'm going to cross 33, 35 municipalities. You really think I'm going to be able to manage that? And how is everybody really going to understand what the rules are? That's why there's the ADA, that's why there's one agency that controls the airspace in the United States. And you start creating hundreds of people, and they're not subject matter experts, we got a serious problem. Your safety's going to go down the tank. And this is a topic that we're going to have to wrestle with.
So, look, that's certainly well said, and I want to be careful, though, because I don't want to evolve in this portion of the discussions to kind of a pro versus con of different ways to look at the airspace rights. The purpose of this is to say, hey, is there topics that this group wants to address to be able to make recommendations as a committee to the FAA? So it was raised that we may want to look at this. So we'll certainly follow up in a discussion. We'll look at the previous work and see if it makes sense to re-raise it to this group again at some point in the future. But very well said.
And I just want to clarify that it is the job of the DFO to task the DAC. And so while I'm willing to listen, it is not this committee in this forum that determines the tasking. It is through the deliberations of the FAA that we come back and give the tasking to the DAC.
So are there any other open items before we move into closing remarks? Okay. So, yeah, apparently, yes.
Sorry, just very quickly. I'm reacting again. There was a comment earlier on the sort of, we're not sure how mature some of the remote ID, or especially as we now are talking about it for deconfliction, vehicle-to-vehicle technologies are. Over the last 4 years, NASA has done a lot of work with the technical capability, interoperability events. That sort of has fizzled out a little bit, and we have multiple technical interoperability events happening sort of in multiple test sites or under IPP or internationally. I think the topic of how we demonstrate through interoperability events that these technical standards and performance standards are actually ready to be operationalized is really important. Someone has to take a leadership position on this. It can be industry, it can be a standard body, it can be the FAA tasking NASA, but someone has, like, we have to have continuity in that domain. Thank you.
Lauren Cass, American. Just one quick comment. We've talked on and off about the safety aspect and about safety's got to be our number one goal, and I think we all agree with that. I do think it would be helpful for the group maybe to get a better understanding of the safety management system that the FAA has employed successfully over the years that Joe talked about earlier. It seems to me maybe at least for the next DAC, could have somebody come in and talk about that, because for every change you make or any new process, there's a risk management matrix you follow, and I think it would be handy for a lot of these things we're discussing now. Some of those things could be checked off into those matrices. So I think that would be a good idea for the entire group.
Lauren, I would love to come back and talk about FAA Order 8040.6, the safety risk management for unmanned aircraft
I really
systems.
loved seeing that.
Yeah, we would be happy to put that on the agenda next time around.
And you can thank Joe for teeing that up this morning.
I think that's a plan. Closing remarks, Tim?
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for not only your participation here today and coming in, taking the time out of your busy schedules to participate with the DAC today, but also all the hard work that went into the recommendations from the 3 taskings that we received today. Very thoughtful work, very thorough work, very much appreciated. As I stated earlier, we will now take those internally and figure out how we can use them best within the
Items. First of all, again, I would like to not only thank everybody who participated in today's meeting, but also all of the different task groups. I mean, for the first 3 tasks to come up with a succinct set of recommendations, and quite frankly, one of the most exciting things that I heard today was also just the fact that how closely we're now in communication with the FAA that we're going to get direct feedback on those task groups at the January meeting. So very exciting that we'll have direct input to see exactly what recommendations are being considered and, if what ones aren't, we can have a discussion around that as well. So that's very exciting to me, and I'm sure many other members on the committee. Also, I would be remiss if I did not specifically thank Diana, who has done a terrific job of working with all of the different task groups and helping me stay organized for these meetings. She is a force to be reckoned with in the industry and really has helped today run very smoothly behind the scenes, but also in making sure that as these task groups are putting together their recommendations, we're doing it in an organized way and it's being brought to the full attention of the Drone Advisory Committee. Diana, thank you very much for all of your help and assistance. And then lastly, for those of you that want to continue to talk about drones in the industry, I would invite you to 12 Stories at 75 District Square Southwest. We have the rooftop bar for people drinking both alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks this early in the day. That'll start at 4 o'clock, and I welcome all of you to come join us there and continue discussions of what's taking place in the industry. I look forward to our next meeting in about 3 months or so from now, and continuing the conversation. Thank you very much, everyone.